Grace, peace, and mercy all. This is Pastor Chris again. I'm here doing our Ask the Pastor. So in this episode, the question is, will you please explain the difference between an apostle and a disciple? Now, initially I thought this was a really simple question, but then I realized very quickly that there's a lot of places where my initial answer that I had in my head actually gets blurred a lot. So here's the initial answer, then I'll kind of expand out where the lines aren't so easy to color in. So simple answer is the disciples are the 12 folk, and being a disciple is following after Jesus, right? So the 12 folk who follow after Jesus, they're learning from him in a variety of ways, through his teaching, through experiencing his healing and exorcism ministries, through themselves going and doing things similar to what Jesus did. So that's them being disciples, literally people who follow after, who are following the teaching of Jesus, learning from Jesus. So they're students of the Rabbi Jesus. And then around chapter 13 through I think 16 of John's Gospel, a shift occurs where Jesus says, "No longer shall I call you student, now I call you friends." And at that point, he sort of lets them know, you got everything that I have taught you. You'll need to brush up here and there, continuing ed of discipleship or whatever. But you have the basics of it there. Now you move from being a disciple to being an apostle, one who has mastered the gospel and can spread it, can go out, to be sent out, right? So a disciple is somebody who follows after Jesus. An apostle is one who is sent out by Jesus. Pretty simple there, that there's this fulcrum point when Jesus washes the disciples' feet and lets them know that they're more than they initially think they are, and then they become apostles. But very quickly it gets a little more muddied and complicated. So, for example, as pastor, I preach a lot about us being disciples of Jesus, folk who are following after Jesus. In fact, right now we're heading into Lent, right, this Wednesday, at least as I'm shooting this tomorrow. No, 2 days from now will be Ash Wednesday. So this is a point where we practice alms, fasting, and prayer especially. And I talk a lot about that as being ways where we practice discipleship, and it makes us more fully disciples of Jesus. So it's helping us learn from Jesus, those three practices. So that's a different way that we talk about disciple, right? So I kind of muddy the water when I talk about that, but I think it's worth recognizing the ways in which we are still learning from Jesus to this very day. At the same time, apostle can be sort of funny as well. We can blame the Apostle Paul for this. First off, Apostle Paul, he never actually was there with the other 12 disciples. He shows up later. He, in fact, experiences the risen Christ, but he never meets Jesus beforehand, before the resurrection, as far as we know. And that suggests that he is, in a sort of technical sense, not someone who has experienced Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, which is one of those other definitions of being an apostle. That said, he in turn writes in a couple of his letters that anybody that calls him a second-rate apostle can, kind of do this or that to themselves. He is none too kind in some of his wording. So, Apostle Paul, and he sees himself as an apostle because he is someone who's sent to a particular set of people, in this case, the Gentiles, the non-Jews. He sees himself as apostle to the Gentiles. And then this opens up a whole can of worms about what and who an apostle is, because you then have Thomas, on one hand, right, experienced Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, but he's also called, for some folk, the apostle to India. For that matter, you have Cyril and some other folk who are apostles to Russia, to Moscow. You have St. Patrick, the apostle, to Ireland, things like that, right? So you have different people who are sent out to particular groups of people. There's some people currently trying to lay claim to being the digital apostle, right? That they're the ones that are bringing the message, the good news of Jesus Christ to the internet, right? So that's their thing. That's how they are sent out by Jesus as a master of the gospel to teach the gospel to others. So again, I initially thought this was a really easy question I could just knock out of the park, but then I realized there were a few other extraneous things. But I would say at base, sort of ignoring some of the tendrils and rabbit holes that you can go down when you think about this term. At base, disciples are folk who are following after Jesus, learning from Jesus. And then apostles are those who are being sent out by Jesus into the world to preach the gospel. And as you might imagine, we're oftentimes both of those, right? That we still are continually learning from Jesus, learning the gospel, right? The neat thing is every time you teach the gospel as an apostle, right, you end up by teaching it, you learn it again yourself more fully. I mean, that's why teaching can be such a rewarding thing. Teaching the faith is so rewarding because teaching it, you again learn it. And by learning it, you get to be a disciple, then you're an apostle. It's this whole thing that's a pretty cool experience. And I hope all of you get, in one way or another, to experience both of those things reinforcing each other. So, with that, apostle, sent out, disciple, following after. So that's what I have for you all. God bless.